Lab 9 is all about predicting solar storms. With solar storms, most of you might be familiar with the northern lights, right? One of the really cool and pretty benign effects of solar wind. Some of our other solar storms can be pretty destructive, shutting down communication grids, frying our satellites, both national security, but also things like our internet, right? SpaceX just launched a bunch of small satellite cubes to try and bring internet to rural communities. Fried, right? Our GPS systems fried. Our astronauts on our International Space Station. So we want to know when these things are coming so we can take some protective measures, such as putting our satellites in safe mode, maybe moving the astronauts to a different location on the space station to minimize their risk. So Lab 9 looks at how they go about doing these predictions. The pre-lab has a couple of questions for you to answer to get started, and then you're going to dive right into the different steps and the different things that sun scientists look at to predict these storms. You're going to be using a PBS lab link to do that. The site looks like this, right? The link is on our lab assignment page. If you are having trouble with one web browser, please try another. This one is in Google Chrome, and it seems to work okay. There's some reading that goes along with it. Once you're ready to start, you're going to look at solar cycle, storm prediction, and then you're going to do your own open investigation. So we're going to start with solar cycle, and it's going to take you through the different steps. Right? This first part asks you to count the sunspots, and it's going to look at grouping sunspots. Right? Our sunspots always come in, well, pairs, right? A north pole and a south pole. So our sunspots are relatively cool areas on the surface of the sun, and the reason that they're relatively cool is not because they're cold. Right? The surface of our sun is about 6,000 degrees Kelvin. When we look at sunspot temperatures, it's a measly 4,500 degrees Kelvin, but it's enough of a difference for the rest of the sun's surface to outshine those sunspots, and they appear dark. And the reason for their temperature discrepancy is that magnetic field lines that are starting to emanate from inside the sun out to the surface and loop back in are forcing the hot plasma to stay trapped under the surface. So not as much heat is getting out, therefore it's not warming up those areas. And so we're going to look at groups and then individual spots within those groups. And it's going to ask you to do some calculations, right? You can move this area of view around. I shouldn't say it's going to ask you to do calculations. It's going to ask you to do counting, and it's going to do the calculations for you. Right? You can zoom in as close as you want, well, up to a level, to get a better view of whether or not your group has 1 sunspot, 8 sunspots in it. Right? And then you're going to put in your numbers. I'm just going to make up some numbers here. And then you'll hit submit. Right? And it's going to explain to you on this one how they calculated so that you can get an idea of whether or not yours was a decent count or not. And then you'll click next, and you're going to go through this for a couple of different dates. And then once you have those done, you can go to the next section. So you're going to record your groups and spots for each of your dates on your lab diagram. And by lab diagram, I mean lab chart. So here's your chart. You're going to give me the estimate that you ended up with, what it came up with after you put in groups and numbers and hit calculate or next, and then what it gave you as a scientific estimate. I don't care how right or wrong you are. One of the things that we're looking at is, well, if your estimates were off, why were they off? Right? And that's question 4. The way people lose points here is tell me, well, it was human error. I just counted wrong. Well, why? Why did you count wrong? What about that made it difficult to count? So get specific on that one. Once you're done with the sunspot counting, you're going to look at the storm prediction. And the storm prediction has different sections within it. You're going to look at big spots, complicated spots, how they grow, how they tell the magnetic field lines, and then you're going to look at some filaments on the sun. Each of these, you're going to be asked to pick a region. So tell me in the second part of each of these exercises, did you pick the right region? Yes or no. Doesn't matter if it was correct or not, because either way, you're going to tell me what led you to make that choice. Part 3, you're going to put it all together and make your own investigation. Here is the open investigation section. So you can change your date and your time and the time step of the images, and then you're going to add an instrument. So as you can see, right, this is a past, right? You're only going to be able to go from 94 to 2013. So I'm picking about 10 years ago from the date that I shot this movie, which is January 24th. I don't know, we'll keep this time here. And then I'll use one day as my time step. And then I'm going to click add an instrument. And there's different observations that you can make based on what instrument or observatory that you use. One of the things you're going to have to do later in this lab is take a look at each of these, well, I think 5 of them, and learn a little bit more about them. So that may be something you want to do before you go into this, because it might make it a little more interesting, a little more fun. I'm going to choose Soho, and we'll leave it here. Yeah. And then you can zoom in, right? Or you can zoom out, right? And so they've blocked out the sun, right? The visible surface of the sun. So they've made basically a man-made eclipse on this one. And then I'm going to click movie. I'm going to select an area. This one looks awful bright, so let's see what's going on here. And I'm going to click OK. And then let's see, duration. Let's go for a week and click OK. And it's going to then compile the video. Once the video is compiled, I'm going to look at it and see what happened. And this is where I'm going to talk about what happened. You may not have had anything happen in your video, and that's okay. Tell me what you expected to happen. But make sure you describe your movie. If you're having trouble getting the movie going, please email me sooner rather than later so I can try and help troubleshoot. This is kind of fun. The next section, question 19 is what I promised. You're going to look into a couple of them. Looks like only 3 of them this semester. And tell me a little bit about them. Research them. See what they're going to do. What's the purpose of these satellites? What are their names? Then the last question is your conclusion section. This is where people lose the most points. They get to the end of the lab, they're like, great, I'm done. Let me just write up a couple things here. Keep in mind, this is a conclusion paragraph for the entire lab, right? You're putting together everything that you did in this lab to come up with a short 3 to 4 paragraph article for a regional newsletter that talks about 4 or 5 different points that are listed in the conclusion. Again, if you have any questions, please let me know. You can reach me through email or Canvas messaging.